What's the biggest risk you took without telling anyone? I used to think chasing a dream could wait until life got easier, but that's what my parents told me when I said I wanted to be a chef. They said dreams were for people who had backup plans and that real life needed real jobs. So I signed the paperwork for business school and tried to believe it would be enough. And I convinced myself that someday, maybe after graduation, I could go back to it. But everything changed the day I passed the mall bulletin board on my way to the bus stop. A yellow flyer caught my eye, and it was for an amateur cooking contest that weekend, with no experience needed, and it was free to enter. At first, I kept walking and told myself it was silly, and I wasn't even ready or had the time. But after a few steps, I turned around and stood there staring at it, and I realized something that scared me more than failing. I realized I would hate myself if I never even tried. The contest was small, with plastic tables, folding chairs, and a bakery giving out samples. It wasn't fancy, but it felt like home, and I made the only thing I really knew how to make without thinking. My grandmother's chicken empanadas, but I didn't even hear the crowd or the buzz of the mall around me. It was just me and the dough, and the smell of garlic. When they announced my name for first place, I almost didn't believe it. I stood there holding a plastic trophy and a gift card to a cooking supply store, trying not to cry, and for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't pretending to be somebody else. I planned to keep it a secret, but secrets have a way of slipping out. A few weeks later, during a family barbecue, my cousin started bragging about all the awards her kids had won, and before I could stop her, she mentioned my contest. She said she saw my name in the mall newsletter and joked about me being the next celebrity chef, and everyone laughed except my parents. But later, when the plates were cleared and the family was scattered across the backyard, they found me by the grill, and they didn't yell, but my mom told me I was being foolish, and that cooking was fine for a hobby, but real life didn't wait for silly dreams. And my dad told me they had sacrificed too much to see me throw away my future over some childish fantasy. And I stood there nodding like I agreed, but something inside me broke. That night, I packed a duffel bag with a few clothes and a notebook of old recipes and left. I crashed on my friend Mia's couch and promised him it was just for a few days, though I had no plan. The next morning, I walked into a rundown diner near Mia's apartment and asked if they needed help. The manager looked me up and down and handed me an apron without asking too many questions. The pay was terrible and the hours were worse, but I didn't care. I just needed a start. I worked the grill at night, scraped grease off pans, and cleaned the soda machines until my fingers ached. And during the day, I saved every penny I could and signed up for a cheap community culinary class. But it wasn't glamorous, and some days I wanted to quit. But every time I folded pastry dough or caramelized onions, I remembered why I left. One Thursday night, about 3 months after I started at the diner, a man came in just before closing. He sat at the counter, ordered coffee and a slice of pie, and stayed long after the other customers left. But I didn't think much of it. I just cleaned the grill like usual. But before he left, he asked who made the pie. So I told him it was me, half expecting him to complain. But instead, he told me he owned a restaurant downtown, and my pie was better than most of the ones he paid professionals to bake. He asked if I ever thought about going to culinary school, but I laughed and told him maybe in another life, and he offered me a full scholarship. He said he liked helping people who remembered that food wasn't just food, it was heart, and he said he saw it in the way I worked. The night before I left, I sat at Maya's kitchen table and wrote my parents a letter and told them I loved them and I understood why they wanted the best for me. But sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is let them choose their own kind of hard life, even if it's not the life you imagined. The scholarship was real. Marcus Rivera, the restaurant owner, turned out to be a graduate of the Culinary Institute himself. He'd grown up poor in the same neighborhood where I was working, started washing dishes at 14, and now owned 3 successful restaurants across the city. When I showed up at his office downtown with my duffel bag and that plastic trophy from the mall contest, he smiled like he'd been expecting me. "You know why I'm doing this?" he asked, pouring coffee from an expensive machine that probably cost more than I made in a month at the diner. "Because 20 years ago, some chef took a chance on a punk kid who didn't know a whisk from a spatula, and that punk kid was me." The culinary school was nothing like I'd imagined. The other students had professional knife sets and talked casually about stages they'd done in France. I showed up with borrowed textbooks and a set of knives Marcus had given me, feeling like I was pretending to belong. The first week, we had to make a simple omelet. I watched classmates fold perfect French omelets like they'd been doing it their whole lives, while mine looked like scrambled eggs wrapped in a blanket. Chef Patterson, our instructor, walked the stations with his hands behind his back, tasting everything with the same spoon he'd wipe clean between bites. When he got to my station, I held my breath. He cut into my sad omelet, took a bite, and made a face I couldn't read. "What's your background?" he asked. "Diner cook for 3 months, I said, waiting for him to tell me I didn't belong there. Instead, he nodded. "Good. You know what it means to work. That matters more than perfect technique. Technique we can teach. Work ethic, we can't." But not everyone was so understanding. There was this girl, Vanessa, whose parents owned a chain of upscale restaurants. She'd been cooking since she could hold a spoon and never let anyone forget it. During our second week, we were paired up for a sauce competition. She looked at my station setup and sighed. "Just follow my lead, okay? I don't want your inexperience dragging down my grade." I wanted to tell her where she could stick her attitude, but I needed to be here. So I followed her instructions, measured what she told me to measure, and watched her create this beautiful hollandaise that looked like it belonged in a magazine. When Chef Patterson tasted it, he praised the technique, the seasoning, the presentation. Then he looked at me. What was your contribution here? Vanessa jumped in before I could answer. Oh, she helped with prep work, basic stuff. Something about the way she said it, like I was just there to wash her dishes, made my face burn. But I kept quiet. I needed this more than I needed my pride. The real test came during our first practical exam. We had to prepare a 3-course meal in 2 hours, using mystery basket ingredients. I drew lamb chops, root vegetables, and chocolate. Classic combinations, but I'd never worked with lamb before. My hands were shaking as I trimmed the fat, trying to remember everything I'd read about proper preparation. Vanessa was next to me, working with confidence that came from years of practice. Her lamb was perfectly scored, her vegetables cut into precise brunoise. I looked at my rough chopping job and felt like I was back at that first contest, wondering what I was doing there. But then I thought about my grandmother's hands, how they moved without thinking when she cooked. She never measured anything, never followed recipes, just trusted her instincts. I closed my eyes for a second, took a deep breath and let muscle memory take over. I seared the lamb the way I'd seen her sear pork chops on her old gas stove. I roasted the vegetables with herbs I'd watched her grow in coffee cans on her windowsill. For dessert, I made a simple chocolate mousse, but I added a pinch of cinnamon the way she used to do with her hot chocolate on winter mornings. When time was called, I looked at my plates. They weren't Instagram perfect like Vanessa's, but they looked like home, like love, like the food that had made me want to cook in the first place. Chef Patterson tasted everyone's dishes in silence. When he got to mine, I watched his face carefully. He cut into the lamb, tried the vegetables, took a spoonful of the mousse. His expression didn't change, but he took a second bite of everything. Interesting choices, he said, moving on to the next station. I was sure I'd failed, but when grades were posted the next day, I'd gotten an A. Vanessa, with all her perfect technique, got a B+. She cornered me after class, furious. How is that possible? My plating was flawless. My technique was textbook perfect. Maybe, I said, packing up my knives. But did it taste like anything? That night, I called Marcus to tell him about the exam. He laughed when I described Vanessa's reaction. Let me guess. Rich parents, expensive equipment, trained since she was 5. How did you know? Because I've met 100 Vanessas. They know how to cook, but they don't know why to cook. There's a difference. You'll figure that out as you go. The months passed quickly. I worked nights at the diner to pay for living expenses, while Marcus covered tuition. Some days I was so tired I could barely stand, but I was learning not just knife skills and sauce techniques, but how flavors work together, how to balance a menu, how to lead a kitchen team. My relationship with my parents was still frozen. Mom called occasionally, leaving voicemails asking when I was coming home, reminding me that my spot at business school was still waiting. Dad didn't call at all. I wrote them letters I never sent, explaining why I had to do this, why their dreams for me weren't wrong, but they weren't mine either. Near the end of my first year, we had externship placements. Most students went to fancy establishments downtown. I asked Marcus if I could work at one of his restaurants. He shook his head. You need to see how other kitchens operate. I've got you set up at Chez Laurent. It's a Michelin-starred place. Chef Laurent is tough, but fair. You'll learn things there I can't teach you. Chez Laurent was everything the diner wasn't. Pristine white walls, equipment that looked like it belonged in a spaceship, and a kitchen staff that moved like a ballet company. Chef Laurent was a small French man with eyes that missed nothing, and a voice that could cut glass when he was displeased. My first day, he assigned me to prep work. I spent 8 hours brunoising vegetables, each cut examined and criticized until my fingers cramped around the knife handle. The other cooks, most of them culinary school graduates with years of experience, watched me struggle without offering help. American culinary schools, muttered the sous chef, a thin man named Philippe. They teach you to cook from books. Here you learn to cook from your mistakes. I made plenty of mistakes. Burned sauces, over-seasoned proteins, plated dishes that looked like abstract art painted by a drunk person. But I also learned how to work under pressure, how to communicate in the verbal shorthand of professional kitchen, how to taste constantly, adjusting seasoning with tiny pinches and drops until everything was perfect. 3 months into my externship, we had a busy Saturday night, 300 covers, 2 private parties, and the food critic from the city paper had made a reservation. Everything that could go wrong did. The walk-in cooler broke down, flooding the prep area. One of the line cooks called in sick. The dishwasher quit mid-shift. I was assigned to guard manger, responsible for all the cold appetizers and salads. Simple stuff, I thought, until the orders started coming in faster than I could process them. My station was drowning in tickets, and I could feel Chef Laurent's eyes on me as plates backed up. Move faster, Philippe hissed, expediting orders with military precision. You're killing the I was cutting ingredients as fast as I could, but my knife work wasn't clean enough. My plating wasn't consistent. Sweat dripped into my eyes, and my hands started shaking from exhaustion and stress. I was about to ask for help when I heard a voice behind me. Step aside. Chef Laurent materialized at my station, his hands moving with incredible speed and precision. In 30 seconds, he'd plated 3 salads that looked like they belonged in an art gallery. But instead of taking over completely, he handed me the tweezer. Show me your microgreens placement, he said quietly. I placed the delicate greens with shaking fingers, trying to match his elegant arrangement. He watched, adjusted my hand position slightly, then nodded. Better. Continue. For the rest of the night, he stayed close to my station, offering corrections and guidance without taking over. When the last plate left the pass at midnight, I was exhausted but proud. We'd served every order without sending anything back. After service, Chef Laurent called me into his office. I expected criticism, maybe a suggestion that restaurant work wasn't for me. Instead, he poured 2 glasses of wine and sat across from his desk. "You have potential," he said in his precise English. "Raw potential, but potential nonetheless. Your knife work needs improvement. Your organization skills need work, but you have something more important than technique." "What's that?" "You don't give up. I've seen many culinary students come through here. Most are technically proficient, but lack heart. They cook because they think it will make them famous, not because they love the craft. You cook because you must cook. That is rare." He offered me a permanent position after graduation. Not just prep work, but a spot on the line, working pantry and eventually moving up to proteins. It was everything I dreamed of when I first saw that yellow flyer at the mall. But first, I had to finish school. My final project was designing and executing a 7-course tasting menu, served to a panel of local chefs and food writers. I spent weeks planning, testing recipes, adjusting portions and flavor combinations. The theme I chose was memory, each course inspired by a childhood food memory, elevated with professional techniques. The first course was an amuse-bouche, inspired by my grandmother's empanadas. I made tiny pastry shells filled with a light chicken mousse and topped with a crispy garlic chip. The second course was my take on Mom's Sunday pot roast, a perfectly cooked beef tenderloin with root vegetable puree and red wine reduction. Each dish told a story, connected to a moment in my life that had brought me to this point. The last course was dessert inspired by birthday cakes from childhood, a chocolate souffle with vanilla bean ice cream and candied violets. The night of the presentation, I was nervous in a way I hadn't been since that first mall contest. These weren't amateur judges eating off paper plates. These were professionals who could make or break careers with a single review. Marcus came to support me, sitting at a corner table with a proud smile. My parents didn't come. I'd invited them in a letter explaining what this meant to me, but they never responded. It hurt, but I was getting used to that particular kind of hurt. The service went perfectly. Each dish came out on time, properly plated, seasoned to perfection. I watched the judges taste everything, making notes, discussing flavors and techniques in low voices. When they finished, they excused themselves to deliberate. 20 minutes felt like 20 hours. Finally, Chef Patterson returned with the other judges. He called the 5 students forward and announced the rankings. Third place went to a guy who'd made an elaborate French menu. Second place went to Vanessa, whose technically perfect dishes had impressed with their precision. First place, Chef Patterson said, goes to a menu that reminded us why we fell in love with cooking in the first place. Food that tells a story, that connects us to memory and emotion. Congratulations to our winner. He called my name and I almost couldn't believe it. I'd won, not just placed, but won. The judges shook my hand, praised my creativity and execution. Marcus hugged me like a proud father. "Your grandmother would be proud," he whispered in my ear. Graduation was bittersweet. I'd accomplished something that had seemed impossible just 2 years earlier, but my family wasn't there to see it. I walked across the stage, received my diploma, and posed for pictures with classmates who were heading off to prestigious jobs around the world. After the ceremony, I found a quiet corner and called home. Mom answered on the 3rd ring. "Hi, Mom." "Oh, honey." Her voice was surprised, tentative. "How are you?" "I graduated today from culinary school." Silence. Then, "That's nice, dear. Your father and I have been hoping you'd come to your senses and finish your business degree. It's not too late, you know." I closed my eyes, feeling that familiar weight in my chest. "Mom, I got a job at a Michelin-starred restaurant. This is my career now." "Cooking isn't a career, sweetheart. It's a hobby. You can't support a family working in a kitchen." "I'm not trying to support a family. I'm trying to support myself. I'm trying to be happy. Happiness doesn't pay the bills." I wanted to argue, to explain about passion and purpose and the feeling of creating something beautiful with your hands. Instead, I said goodbye and hung up. Some conversations weren't worth having. My first week at Chez Laurent as a real employee was humbling. Despite my externship experience, working there full-time was different. The pace was relentless, the standards impossibly high, and my fellow cooks treated me like the new kid I was. I worked pantry station, responsible for all cold appetizers and salad. It sounds simple, but during dinner service, I was plating 30 dishes an hour while maintaining consistent portion sizes, perfect presentation, and proper seasoning. My hands were constantly moving, slicing, arranging, tasting, adjusting. Behind Hot called one of the meat cooks, carrying a pan of searing scallops to the pass. The kitchen was a choreographed dance, and one missed step could throw off the entire rhythm. Philippe, now my direct supervisor, watched everything with hawk eyes. If a plate wasn't perfect, he'd send it back without comment. If I fell behind, he'd appear at my station with that look that meant I was disappointing him. "Again, your knife work is sloppy," he said one evening, examining my julienne vegetables. "In France, we would not serve this to dogs." I wanted to tell him exactly what he could do with his French attitude, but I bit my tongue. I needed this job, needed to prove myself. So I recut everything, taking extra care with each piece until they were uniform and precise. The breakthrough came during my 3rd month. We were catering a wedding for 200 people, an off-site event that required transporting our entire operation to a hotel ballroom. I was assigned to help with setup and prep work, basically grunt labor. The bride had requested a special appetizer course, something with local ingredients that told the story of her relationship with her fiancé. They'd met at a farmer's market, bonded bonded over heirloom tomatoes and fresh basil. She wanted something that captured that memory. Chef Laurent was struggling with the concept. His instincts ran toward classical French preparations, but the bride wanted something more rustic, more personal. During our prep meeting, I listened to him describe various options, none of which seemed to capture what she was looking for. Chef, I said, raising my hand tentatively, what if we did a deconstructed caprese, like individual components that let people build their own bite? The room went quiet. Junior cooks didn't usually offer menu suggestions, especially not to Chef Laurent. I immediately regretted speaking up, but Chef Laurent looked interested. Explain, well, we could do heirloom tomato caviar. You know, tomato spheres using molecular gastronomy techniques. Pair it with fresh mozzarella pearls and basil oil. Serve it on small spoons or in shot glasses. Interactive, but elegant. Philippe rolled his eyes. Molecular gastronomy is a gimmick. This is not a theme restaurant. But Chef Laurent was nodding slowly. Show me, he said. I spent the next hour in the test kitchen, working with ingredients and techniques I'd learned in school but never used professionally. The tomato caviar required precise timing and temperature control. Too much sodium alginate and the spheres would be bitter. Too little and they wouldn't hold their shape. After several failed attempts, I got it right. Perfect little orbs that burst with intense tomato flavor, paired with creamy mozzarella and aromatic basil oil. Chef Laurent tasted it, considered for a moment, then smiled. We will use this. Philippe added to the prep list. The wedding was a success. The interactive appetizer was a hit with guests, and the bride cried when she tasted it, saying it perfectly captured her first date memory. But more importantly, I'd shown Chef Laurent that I could contribute beyond just following orders. He started giving me more creative input on daily specials. When regulars requested modifications to menu items, he'd ask for my suggestions. Slowly, I was becoming more than just a line cook. The real test came 6 months later. Our sous chef, Jean-Marie, left to open his own restaurant in Portland. It was sudden. He gave 2 weeks' notice on a Tuesday, right before our busiest season. Chef Laurent needed to promote someone quickly, and he had to choose between me and 2 other cooks who'd been there longer. You are too young, Philippe warned me. Too inexperienced. This kitchen requires someone with authority. Maybe he was right. I was 23 years old, had been cooking professionally for less than 2 years, but I'd worked harder than anyone, stayed late to perfect new recipes, came in early to prep for busy nights. I'd earned this. The trial week was brutal. As acting sous chef, I was responsible for managing the entire line during service, ensuring every plate met our standards before it left the path. I had to coordinate timing between different stations, handle special requests, and maintain the pace that kept Chef Laurent's reputation intact. The first night, I made mistakes, called out orders in the wrong sequence, approved a plate that was slightly under-seasoned. Philippe caught both errors and gave me looks that could have curdled milk. Perhaps you are not ready for this responsibility, he said after service, loud enough for the other cooks to hear. But I learned from those mistakes. By the third night, I was anticipating problems before they happened, adjusting prep lists based on reservations, working with each station to ensure smooth service. The kitchen started running like clockwork. Friday night was the real test. 300 covers, 2 wine dinners, and a special menu for a corporate event. Everything had to be perfect. I arrived early, double-checked all prep work, held a brief meeting with the line cooks to go over timing and special requirements. Service started smoothly. Orders flowed steadily, each station keeping up with demand. Then disaster struck. Our lead meat cook burned his hand badly on a panhandle. Second-degree burns that required immediate medical attention. We lost our most experienced protein cook during the dinner rush. I could have panicked. Called Chef Laurent, who was at a food conference in Chicago. Asked Philippe to take over while I figured out how to cover the meat station. Instead, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. Marco, I called to one of our prep cooks, a guy who'd been trying to get promoted to the line for months. You know meat temperatures. He nodded, eyes wide with opportunity and terror. You're on proteins tonight. Philippe, can you float between stations and help wherever needed? For a second, I thought Philippe might refuse, but he saw the same thing I did. We had 2 choices, work together or crash and burn in front of 300 guests. Oui, chef, he said, and I realized he'd called me chef for the first time. We pulled through. Marco stepped up beautifully. Philippe swallowed his pride and helped where needed, and every single plate left the kitchen on time and perfectly prepared. When the last dessert was served, the entire line looked at me with something I'd never seen before. Chef Laurent called the next morning. Word had gotten back to him about how we'd handled the crisis. The position is yours, he said simply. Philippe will train you on ordering and scheduling. Your salary increase is effective immediately. I hung up and sat in my tiny apartment, looking at the acceptance letter from business school that I'd never thrown away. 2 years ago, my parents thought this piece of paper represented my future. Now it was just a reminder of how far I'd traveled from their expectations. That weekend, I decided to try one more time with them. I drove to their house, the same suburban split level where I'd grown up, and knocked on the front door. Mom answered, surprised to see me. Honey, what are you doing here? I wanted to tell you something. I got promoted. I'm sous chef at a restaurant downtown. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile you give a child who's proud of a finger painting. That's nice, dear. Come in, your father's watching the game. Dad was in his recliner, beer in hand, barely glancing up when I entered. How's the cooking going? Good, really good. I wanted to invite you both to dinner at my restaurant. As my guests, Mom and Dad exchanged a look. Sweetheart, Mom said gently, we appreciate the offer, but we don't really eat at fancy places. places. Besides, those restaurants are so expensive, it wouldn't cost you anything. I want to cook for you. I want you to see what I do. Dad finally looked at me directly. Son, we're proud that you're working, but this cooking thing, it's not going to last forever. You need to think about your real future. Get married, buy a house, have kids. You can't do that on a cook's salary. I felt that familiar frustration rising in my chest. Dad, I'm making good money. I'm happy. Isn't that worth something? Happiness doesn't put food on the table. Mom said, echoing words I'd heard my whole life. But I put food on tables every night. Beautiful food that made people smile, that brought them together, that created memories. Why couldn't they see that? I left without dinner, without the validation I'd hoped for. But driving back to the city, I realized something important. I didn't need their approval anymore. I'd found my path and I was walking it with confidence. The restaurant industry is small, and word travels fast about good cooks. Within 6 months of my promotion, I started getting calls from headhunters, offers from other establishments looking for experienced sous chefs. The money was tempting, and some of the opportunities were incredible. But I stayed at Chez Laurent, not just because of loyalty to Chef Laurent and Marcus, but because I was still learning, still growing, still discovering what kind of chef I wanted to become. That discovery came during our annual menu redesign. Chef Laurent gave each sous chef the opportunity to contribute a signature dish, something that represented our personal style and background. It was a chance to put my own stamp on the menu at one of the city's most respected restaurants. I thought about my grandmother's kitchen, about the foods that had shaped my palate and my love of cooking. But I also thought about everything I'd learned since leaving home. Classical techniques, flavor combinations, presentation styles that elevated simple ingredients into art. My dish was a play on my grandmother's chicken empanadas. Instead of the traditional deep-fried pastry, I made delicate filo cups filled with a refined chicken confit. The filling included traditional spices, but also unexpected elements. A touch of truffle oil, microgreens, and a small quenelle of avocado mousse. When I presented it to Chef Laurent, he tasted it thoughtfully, taking time to identify each component and how they work together. "This is you," he said finally. "Your heritage, your training, your vision. This goes on the menu." Seeing my dish listed among the appetizers at Chez Laurent was surreal. Watching guests order it, enjoying it, sometimes asking the server about the preparation, that was when I knew I'd truly become a chef. The dish became popular enough that we started getting requests for the recipe. Food bloggers wrote about it. A local magazine featured it in their must-try dishes article. But the moment that meant the most came 3 months after it was added to the menu. Marcus came in for dinner with a group of business associates. He ordered my empanada dish, and I watched from the kitchen as he tasted it. The smile that spread across his face was worth every exhausted night, every burned finger, every moment of doubt I'd experienced. After service, he came back to the kitchen to find me. "That dish," he said, "it's perfect. It's you, but elevated. Sophisticated, but still rooted in where you came from. Your grandmother would be proud. But more importantly, you should be proud." I was proud. For the first time since leaving home, I felt like I'd found my place in the world. Not just as a cook, but as a chef with my own voice, my own style, my own contribution to make. 2 years later, Chef Laurent offered me the opportunity I'd been working towards since that first day in culinary school. He was opening a second location, a smaller, more casual place that would showcase modern American cuisine with French influences. He wanted me to be the executive chef. "It is time," he said during our meeting. "You have the skills, the vision, and the leadership ability. This restaurant will be yours to run. My own kitchen, my own menu, my own team to train and inspire." It was everything I dreamed of, and more than I'd ever expected when I saw that yellow flyer at the mall. The new restaurant, called Heritage, opened 6 months later. I designed every aspect of the menu, hired and trained the entire kitchen staff, and worked 18-hour days to ensure every detail was perfect. Opening night was terrifying and exhilarating. Local food critics, industry professionals, and regular customers from Chez Laurent filled every table. I stood in my kitchen, watching my team execute dishes I'd created, and felt a pride that was different from anything I'd experienced before. We got our first review 2 weeks later. The critic praised the innovative approach to comfort food and called my signature dish a deconstructed pot pie with duck confit and truffle vegetables, a masterpiece of technique and flavor. But the review that meant the most came from an unexpected source. I was checking online reviews one morning when I saw a new post that made me stop breathing. "My daughter is the executive chef at this restaurant, and while we don't always understand her choices, we can't deny her talent. The food was exceptional, and we're proud of what she's accomplished." It was signed M and D Johnson, my parents. They'd come to Heritage without telling me, had dinner at my restaurant, and left a public review acknowledging my success. I called them immediately. "Mom, hi sweetheart." Her voice was warm in a way I hadn't heard in years. "We went to your restaurant last weekend. I saw the review, thank you. We should have done this sooner. Should have supported you from the beginning. We were scared, I think. Scared that you were choosing a hard path, that you'd struggle and get hurt." I did struggle. I did get hurt, but I also found something worth struggling for. Dad got on the extension. "Son, what you've built is impressive. Really impressive. I may not understand it, but I respect it, and I'm sorry it took me so long to see that." That conversation was the beginning of rebuilding our relationship. They started coming to Heritage regularly, bringing friends, bragging about their daughter, the chef. It wasn't a complete transformation. They still worried about my financial security, still asked when I was going to settle down and have kids, but they'd accepted that this was my life, my choice, my path. 5 years after Heritage opened, opened. The restaurant had earned a Michelin star, and I'd been featured in national food magazines as one of the country's rising young chefs. I had opportunities to open restaurants in other cities, to appear on cooking shows, to write a cookbook. But success brought its own challenges. The pressure to maintain our reputation was constant. The hours were still brutal. The physical and emotional demands of running a kitchen took their toll. Some days, I wondered if my parents had been right about choosing the easier path. Those doubts usually hit me around 2 a.m. when I was finally leaving the restaurant after a busy service, exhausted and covered in food stains. I'd sit in my car in the empty parking lot and think about the business degree gathering dust in a drawer, about the stable office job I could have had, about the conventional life I'd rejected. But then Monday would come, and I'd walk into my kitchen to find my team prepping for the week ahead. I'd taste the new dishes we were developing, work with young cooks who reminded me of myself 5 years earlier, create something beautiful and delicious that would bring joy to people's lives. And I'd remember why I'd taken that first risk, why I'd walked away from safety and certainty to chase something I couldn't quite name but knew I needed. The biggest risk I took wasn't entering that cooking contest, or leaving home, or dropping out of business school. The biggest risk was believing that I deserved to be happy, that my dreams were worth pursuing, that sometimes the scariest path is the one that leads you home to yourself. I'm 30 now, successful by any measure that matters to me. I have my own restaurant, a team I've trained and mentored, a reputation built on years of hard work and dedication. My parents and I have dinner together once a month, and they've stopped asking when I'm going to get a real job. Last week, I was walking past that same mall where everything started, and I saw a young guy staring at the community bulletin board. He had that same look I must have had, hungry, uncertain, afraid, but hopeful. There was a flyer advertising a local culinary competition, and he was reaching for his phone to take a picture. I almost kept walking, but something made me stop. "You thinking about entering?" I asked. He looked embarrassed. "Maybe. I mean, I'm not really trained or anything. I just like to cook. That's how it starts," I told him. Just liking to cook. I gave him my card, told him to call if he needed advice or wanted to stage at Heritage for a weekend. He looked at the card like I'd handed him a winning lottery ticket. "Really? You'd do that? Someone did it for me once. Changed my whole life." Walking away, I thought about that plastic trophy I'd won all those years ago. The one that's still sitting on the shelf in my apartment. It's not worth anything, but it represents everything. The moment I stopped accepting other people's limitations and started chasing my own possibilities. The biggest risk I ever took was believing in myself when nobody else would. And it turned out to be the safest bet I ever made.